Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Antonio Alanis, and I would like to ask you a question. Are you going through imposter syndrome when submitting your art to galleries as a beginner artist? So, if you are, I welcome you to watch this second video in my series 12 Steps to Exhibiting Your Work in Galleries as a Beginner Artist. This is a continuation of the first video. You can actually see it or watch it in the comments below, and you're more than welcome to look in terms of why we're starting this work. And I wanted to invite you to continue learning more about the 12 points that I was able to create in a checklist that I wanted to have when I was a beginner artist. So a little bit more background about myself is I started working as a professional artist back in 2016, and I've been doing it throughout, I think, 8 years now. And I've exhibited in many exhibitions, mainly in North Carolina, and I wanted to create a video or a series of videos where I would share a lot about my experience as someone who was really trying to learn more about the art world and understand more about what it's like to create work and where it can go in spaces like these, because I know that the art world is full of so many controversial things, and I won't be talking about those controversial things here. You can watch them in many videos that are available in YouTube right now. But I wanted to essentially cut through a lot of the noise that I've been able to listen in these videos, and also provide with some steps that can hopefully allow you as an artist essentially accelerate that learning curve. Because let's face it, exhibiting in galleries can be a lot of work. It can be a lot of misinformation and then just lack of resources of where to turn into. So with this series, I wanted to essentially show my experience as someone who has gone through this world and someone who continues to exhibit and create essentially a map for beginner artists looking to exhibit their work in galleries. So if you remember the first video in this series, there was really an introduction. I talked a lot about imposter syndrome. So today's topic would be imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is a huge roadblock, and it was a huge roadblock to me when I was beginning to exhibit in galleries. I want to first define what imposter syndrome is so that we can start with the definition. This is from Merriam-Webster, and it says that imposter syndrome is a psychological condition marked by self-doubt and fear of being exposed as a fraud. And I think it's important to talk about this because I did not come from a world that it was informed in terms of how to exhibit. And I think that with anything, it was important for me to address the mindset that I had when I was starting out. I don't come from a lot of experience exhibiting in galleries or really breaking into the art world. So a lot of this has been pretty much trial and error, has been a lot of learning by myself. And also, huge shout out to a lot of galleries that have opened up their doors and provided a lot of professional development throughout the years that I'm happy to reflect on and also pass to you all. But let's face it, someone who is an immigrant, someone who does not come from an art career, or someone who has some connection to creating and exhibiting in art galleries, it was difficult for me to understand. I didn't understand a lot about what exhibiting was about, and I think that coming from someone who learned art on their own and exhibiting in galleries or learning about galleries, it seemed like a very exclusive or a space that excluded certain communities, and it carried a connotation of it wasn't for me, or it wasn't something that I wanted to pursue because it didn't feel welcoming, or it felt out of reach and I didn't know how to essentially apply or have my work. One of my first introductions to galleries have to be museums. And again, I will not touch on the topic of museums, but just the idea about exhibiting in a museum and behind glass doors was something that made me think about, really, is my work good enough? Does my work belong in a space like this, right? Who gets to be in a space like this? And how do we get to a space like this? So for me, addressing imposter syndrome was something that I had to do in the very beginning. And some of the tips that I would give you, again, huge disclaimer, this is not medical or psychological advice at all. Please consult with someone who is qualified to give you advice for this. But I will give you some tips that allow me to overcome some of the imposter syndrome. The first was essentially believing in myself and understanding where the imposter syndrome was coming from. As I said before, it was really sitting down with myself and saying, I don't have the experience or I don't have the connections. There's very little, or there are very little resources to find essentially next steps for me to exhibit. So it came from a place of not knowing and also being okay with that. Starting out, it was fine. I said, let's apply to this call and let's see what happens. And I was okay with being rejected. I was okay with not being accepted at that point because I knew that I was just starting out, and also the galleries were very open to welcome me. So that would be the first thing to overcome the imposter syndrome. And the second tip for overcoming imposter syndrome was essentially learning a lot about not tying my self-worth to my work. Meaning that if I were to be rejected or someone rejected me, it was going to be okay. That did not mean that I was less than as a person because I did not get to participate. So essentially, these were very important for me to address at the very beginning, and understood that I was just starting out and nothing was going to be easy because there's a large learning curve, let's face it, when we're trying to navigate the world of art or we're trying to find a space. It can be super difficult to find a location or someone who welcomes our work. Luckily, with me as an artist starting to exhibit in the very, very early age or early in my career, a lot of the galleries were very welcoming, they were inclusive, and they sought to uplift and center voices that were normally not in spaces where we need to be, right? In galleries, in university spaces. So it was a beautiful opportunity for us artists to apply to these opportunities. And I really want to thank the opportunity for a lot of the galleries that open up some of these opportunities for me to exhibit. With that, it's imposter syndrome, super important, and not think a lot about, again, why I didn't deserve, but rather focusing on why I do deserve to be doing this and why my work needs to be there. And being exposed of a fraud, I think it was just unfounded thoughts that were coming from somewhere, but at the end of the day, I knew that believing in my talent was important. And again, talent can be a huge word to define, can mean many things to many people, and that was okay. For me, imposter syndrome was a huge roadblock that I had to get over, and eventually it opened up a lot of the space that I needed to essentially create more work. So that would be point number one. I think that the second tip to overcoming imposter syndrome, and I know I talked a lot about some of these before, is really understanding where the fear was coming from or just the insecurity. As I said previously, this would lead to point number two, which is really, it was something new for me applying to galleries, and it was time for me to step back and say, okay, where is this fear or insecurity coming from? Again, addressing that it's okay for us to apply to things and not being 100% confident, because let's face it, when we are doing something, or at least in my experience, when I'm doing something new, I don't feel extremely knowledgeable about it. I don't know a lot about, let's say, if I were to fix something electronic or do something that I've never done in my life, that is a feeling of being out of water, right? As a fish out of water. And I think that there are a lot of factors that are impacting my understanding of applying to new things or doing new things. And again, I wanted to create this checklist so that all of us would have some sort of guide for us to apply and being okay with that. So I think that when we are applying to galleries and really looking at a new opportunity, it's okay to be fearful of the unknown. It's something new, it's something that we've never done. And that may create some anxiety, and the anxiety comes from unfamiliar territory. Think about all the things that you've done in the past that despite the fear or the anxiety or anything else, you prevail, you push through. That was something that really helped me understand it's okay. Right now, I may feel uncomfortable. Right now, there's a lot of learning. I feel like I'm being stretched. But I think that what really helped me is that with growth, there was discomfort. There was a lot of things that were happening. And I just didn't know, right? Because there was not just about applying, but it was really understanding about writing, about documenting the work, and so many other things. So, again, that insecurity came from lack of experience, not applying to galleries before. And I think that not having the understanding or the knowledge can be paralyzing. Let's think about it. When I was learning how to ride a bike, it was scary. It was, what if I fall? What if I scrape my knee? What if I break a bone? And I think that those things, as people, those early fears may come up again or many times over because of that type of mindset that we're here to essentially keep us safe and survive. But again, understanding that applying to galleries, it may seem scary, but at the end of the day, no one is going to harm you or think about that. So really differentiating between harm and just being okay with the unknown. I had a lot of doubts, I had a lot of questions, but for me, what's important was that I took the first step. And I think that overcoming imposter syndrome is through that. Taking the first step, not expecting that you need to have everything figured out at the beginning, not expecting that you need to have a lot of things settled or a polished biography or a polished CV or a polished body of work. I think that the first step is applying ourselves and not holding ourselves back, right? One of the biggest things that I have is that you lose 100% of the shots that you don't take. So why was I going to essentially reject myself from applying to something where essentially I had not given other people the opportunity to even look at my work? I wanted to really be thoughtful about that. And again, many of the things that you will continue to see here will be information that I've used throughout my career, and hopefully will give you a little glimpse of some things that I've been able to use to overcome a lot of these things that are essentially creating a lot of discomfort and some fear. So again, it was something new and understanding where it was coming from. Continuing on to overcoming imposter syndrome, the third tip that I would give would be working on a body of work to overcome the fear that, or the insecurity that I didn't have a lot of work to exhibit. So when I was exhibiting in 2016, I had some work already created from my early years. In my early years, middle school to high school, and college. Pre-college, I did a lot of work for myself, and it was a lot of experimentation. It was a lot of thinking about what kind of work that I want to create. And it was, I want to say, some were original work, others were copies of other people's work. And I didn't have a lot of a personal voice because I was just growing up and was learning about this kind of work. But again, that could be another video. But when I was in college, I did some pieces, and not a lot of that material was original to me. Some was, I think it was decorative work, but it wasn't until graduate school that I began to take more of a focus on social issues and causes that were important to me. And I think that allowed me to create more work that was aligned with the types of calls that I was doing. Again, I give you that trajectory so that you could have some understanding in terms of what I didn't feel comfortable applying to some of these things because I didn't have a lot of work. But that was okay. I think that one or two pieces that I did have talked about some of the topics that I was interested in exhibiting. One of the first galleries that I ever exhibited was City, where they were doing a call around artist immigrants or art for immigrants and art against the oppressive systems that are impacting our communities. And I did have a painting that I had developed in college. There was just one. It was maybe 9 inches by 12 inches, something maybe the size. I developed that class in a college course, and it was a lot about thinking of myself, my life as an artist, someone growing up in the United States from an immigrant background. And It was good because it was exploring my identity. It was exploring a lot of the things that were impacting me back then. And I think that having the opportunity to be recognized for that in a gallery that essentially fit so well with what I had developed was something that I needed to do. And it's okay if you don't have dozens and dozens of paintings or illustrations or pieces of work. I think that what's important is that you have quality of things that you want to exhibit. So for me, at the beginning, I told myself maybe I don't have a lot to choose from, but that was okay. I think that having just one piece was more than enough. Having one piece was more than enough, and it fit well, and I didn't have to create. Plus, a lot of galleries, if you're doing a group show, normally take between 3 or 5, maybe 3 to 4 or 5 pieces, and you don't have to submit a lot of them. Many of the galleries that I have submitted have been very limited in terms of how many I have needed to submit and create. Of course, if we touch on individual shows or solo shows, that would be more than 5. That it needs more, at least 20 from my experience. And I'll tell you more about that in another time. I think that what's important for me is not being scared or afraid that I had very little to exhibit. I think that what mattered was that my work was beginning to take shape. I think that I myself as an artist was gaining consciousness. I was creating and responding to what was happening around me through my work. And I think that resonated a lot with the people that accepted me into the gallery exhibitions. And that was important for me to know that people were there to support. Again, we'll touch on creating a portfolio or a way to document your work, but I think that what's important here is to pick the work that best suits you, the work that best represents you, the work that best talks about a lot of the things that you stand for. Think about that. What is the work that I want to exhibit? You may be new to this. You don't have to have everything figured out. You can just have a couple of pieces, at least that are strong and can apply. So point number 4 with not having an art style, right? How do we overcome imposter syndrome? So with this one is having an art style, but it being okay with not having one in the beginning. I think that I was a little bit harsh on myself, and I think it's a question that comes up a lot in terms of how do I define my voice? How do I know what I like? How do I know what people will recognize that this is my work? And I think that as beginners, or as a beginner, I was too worried about a stage in my career that would come in later. As I said before, a lot of my early work were copies or thoughts about other people's work, and I didn't have the opportunity to develop the style because of this kind of practice. And I think that as beginners, a lot of times we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to say we want to have a style. Now, having art style can be a lot. It's another separate video. But one of the biggest things that I can say is what helped me overcome imposter syndrome is experimenting. And experimenting can be a vague word in terms of how to overcome imposter syndrome. But the biggest thing for me was essentially looking at other people's work and picking things that I enjoyed from their work. That didn't mean copying from them or replicating their work, but rather borrowing, or some people would say steal, concepts or parts of what they were doing that I liked. For example, texture. I looked at some people's work and I like how the lines looked. I like how the roughness fit with what I wanted to create. And I began to replicate that style of rough line work in my work without essentially copying or mirroring what they had created. It was mostly using what I had seen from other people in my work. So experimenting with texture, experimenting with all the elements of art, looking at what colors resonated with me most, what kinds of palettes I gravitated towards more, what were the things that I identified with, what were the things that made me happy, what were things that made me joyful, what were things that made me hopeful. So those were the things that I was really looking into later. But again, to develop a style takes time, it takes refinement, it takes patience. And I think that patience is important in this work, and not having a super rushed expectations of ourselves, but really looking into all the things that we enjoy, looking into what inspires us, what kind of work do we like to see, what kind of opportunities and themes or topics will help us find our voice. I think that's important. A lot of artists do self-portraits because there's a story that they want to talk about. For me, I really resonate a lot with figurative art where I can place a person and talk about their story. Art is storytelling. And I really enjoy talking about the immigrant experience. I really enjoy talking a lot about things that are impacting our communities, things that are creating things for us and allowing us to live a happier, healthy life. So what I am saying right now, I didn't know or talk about when I was starting in 2016. I talked about identity, and that was part of where I am right now, right? 8 years later. And that was okay. So again, thinking about art style really reminds me a lot about having an artist statement, and I'll talk more about artist statement later. And I do want to say that I want to keep everything or this information very well in tune with what we're going to need to continue to apply for galleries as beginner artists. So I highly encourage you to look at a checklist that I have created for you all. And this checklist is very helpful in ways of how it provides and breaks down a lot of these things in a way that allows us to apply and feel a little bit more comfortable when applying to galleries. And this checklist you can see in my website. It's called 12 Steps to Exhibiting Your Work in Galleries as a Beginner Artist. And the beauty about it is that I've made it succinct. It's less than 20 pages, and it provides a checklist that will help us and remind us about things that we need to keep in mind, and also think about some workbook questions. And when I say workbook, these are questions that allow us to add our perspective and our thoughts to this checklist so that, again, you can personalize based on the steps that I have provided. And the more you think about these steps, the more you increase your chances of applying and getting into galleries. So again, I will leave the link to the 12 steps to exhibiting your work in galleries as a beginner artist. Let's continue to point number 5, which is removing perfectionism and thinking about why my work was not the best to overcome imposter syndrome. So I think that for me, having imposter syndrome was not believing in myself or believing in my work because it was hard to apply and I didn't know how to apply. And I think that with perfectionism, I wanted to exhibit the very best that I could. But as I found later in my life, is that the more I strive for perfection, the farther I am from it. And I don't know if anyone can or has achieved perfection. Being okay essentially with mistakes, being okay with not having everything figured out, being okay with not expecting 110% when we're just starting out, because we're just starting out, right? I think that perfectionism can be, and it has been, a hindering force in my development as an artist. And one of the biggest things that I've learned about as an artist, and maybe you've seen some of this before in other videos, but I talk a lot about letting go. I talk a lot about being okay with not being 100% perfect. I talk a lot about leaving the piece of work where I think it's okay. Always doing my best, and the best can be different in different times of my life. The best can be different when I'm tired. The best can be different when I am happy and excited and energetic. My best can be different when I'm doing things that are hard. My best can be different when I am going through a difficult part in my life, but I need to do them. And being okay with that kind of work. Being okay with not submitting 100% all the time because I could give only 70%. And being okay with they were not perfect. that I was not perfect. So again, the biggest thing would be to accept imperfection, that no piece of art will be ever perfect. We can always work it and work on it and work on it and work on it some more until we find the best angle, the best texture, the best proportion, until we find the very best or the perfect idea of what we want to exhibit or create. Again, even if you don't feel that your work is the best, it's okay. Again, do not deny yourself the chance to apply for things. Do not. Let other people do that for you. We can talk a lot about that, what that means, but do not deny the chance yourself. Give other people the chance for that. And again, there are other ways of overcoming that. Maybe not overcoming, but thinking about it and addressing that. Again, perfectionism is and was not my friend. It was a lot of thinking what I needed to do with very high standards. And let's talk about standards too. I think standards fit very well with perfectionism, with we want the best. We want people to know that the quality of work that we produce is always high. But like I was saying, the best is not always the best at all times. I think that perfectionism can deny a lot of us from growing and from reaching a point where we are okay with growth. I think that for me, what was most important was that I knew that I was doing the best that I could with the abilities and the resources that I had at the time. And I did not expect myself more because I just couldn't. So what has allowed me to overcome imposter syndrome was shifting from the mindset of perfection to continuous improvement. So meaning, even if my work is not good right now, or maybe if my new technique that I'm exploring is the best that I've seen from other people when I've seen their work in galleries or exhibitions, it's okay. Let me tell you, when I was starting out with my iPad, when I was starting my work as a digital artist in Procreate, I wanted to produce the best illustration possible that I could. But what ended up happening was that it didn't allow me to create that because I didn't have the abilities to do that. And again, that could be subjective. And I was just starting out in about 2018, 2019 in digital artwork. And I think it wasn't fair for me to have high expectations because I didn't know how to use the program. I didn't know how to use Procreate as I could because I was just starting out. And I think a lot through analogies when I was driving or learning how to drive. A lot of the work was known to me because I didn't know how to move things or what things meant. So that comes with practice, that comes with understanding, that comes with knowledge. So again, improve continuously, pick something that you want to grow on, and I think this could be another thing later that we can all explore. But the biggest thing for me now looking back at about 5-6 years since I started my journey as a digital artist is that I have seen how more comfortable, how more confident I am with my digital artwork, how content I feel with the progress that I've done as an artist from how I started. I know that I've grown as an artist and I feel more comfortable exploring other techniques that I couldn't do or reproduce. So again, perfectionism is not our friend. Perfectionism is something that can paralyze us. Perfectionism is something that can prevent us from taking the first step. Even if you are doing work that is 20%, 30%, it's okay. Submit it. Submit to a gallery and see what happens. Let them tell you about your work. So point number 6 in overcoming the imposter syndrome that held me back when I was starting out is I didn't have an art major. So something that you need to know about me is I pretty much learned how to draw and paint on my own. I did take some classes, the fundamentals, in middle school, high school, and college. And I didn't want to create a major in art because back then when I was in college, even in high school, I didn't believe that people could become full-time artists. And I say this just to say that there are so many things and mindsets that held or were holding me back then. Now look at me, I'm doing this full time as a full time artist, and it's just amazing how everything can happen in 5-10 years. But again, let's focus back on applying to galleries. What was holding me back is I didn't have a major or a certificate or a diploma that said that I was an art major. Mostly because of saying that or thinking that the arts were not valuable. That I always looked doing the arts because they were mostly, hobbies, and you could make a life as an artist or you would starve as an artist and all these other negative things that I used to hear and that I had internalized from where I was living or was exposed to. Again, when you look into art gallery submissions, not a lot of them will require a certificate, or many of them haven't actually required certificates or diplomas when applying to galleries. Applying to galleries is not like we need to practice law or we need to practice medicine. They need to have a test or anything like that. It may be some places, but the places that I've been, I haven't had that experience. So again, being okay with not having that background, being okay with not having that experience, but still that I had the fundamentals packed, that the fundamentals were there, that the fundamentals were essentially in my ability to create something, to create work. And that it was okay that being a self-taught artist who took classes in college and high school and middle school and practiced on the side, I had something to say, I had some abilities. And again, I think that I was being too hard on me, that just because I didn't have an art major, that I didn't deserve to be in a space like that. So again, we can talk a lot about how art majors, and I'm very careful not to talk about art majors because it's an experience that I don't have. And I want to talk about my truth and how I happen to apply to art galleries. I think there are other people who can be more informed about talking about their career as artists with an art major or an art career. So I encourage you all to find as many perspectives as possible when applying to galleries or just learning about yourself as an artist, creating and growing in this world of art. Again, what ended up helping me overcome the imposter syndrome is being okay with not having an art major or art degree and growing a portfolio. So a portfolio essentially was a collection or a catalog of the work that I had produced for a specific cause or a specific gallery. And it was helpful for me. It was helpful for me to know that I was beginning to create and that other people could look at the work that I was producing. So again, I won't say that a portfolio is replacing an art degree or experience from an art school. What I'm saying is that the art calls that I have applied to were very welcoming to accept that portfolio, and I ended up getting in. Again, I did not have to have an art major or an art degree to apply to galleries. So point number 7, this is how to overcome imposter syndrome, and this is from not knowing what to do or not knowing how to start and how to overcome it. One of the things that has allowed me to do a lot of addressing things that I don't know is really through researching and having the self-autonomy or the autonomy to find things on my own. As someone who has really grown into an artist, I come from a background of education. I come from a background of being an educator, and I'm a naturally curious person. So if I have something that's not working, or there's something that I'm going through, or there's something that is bothering me, or I don't know how to start, the best thing that I will do is to sit, research, read, and prepare. So research, read, and prepare. So I think that what has allowed me to create the work that I'm creating right now is by researching, by preparing myself, by knowing and filling in that void of information. So understanding the basics. Understanding the basics of applying to a gallery by reading and by submitting pieces of work. Looking at art calls, looking at other people's work and their experience, and seeking guidance. So a way to overcome imposter syndrome is to seek guidance from someone. I'm very lucky that I have worked with many experienced artists that were older than me, 15, 20 years older. And whenever I had an exhibition, invitation, not my exhibition, whenever there were other artists exhibiting, I would always take time to talk to the artists and one, congratulate them, thank them for the work. And a lot of those conversations, believe it or not, were turned into informal advice sessions where the artists would share some of the things that work for them. So being the curious person that I am, I would always ask them, so what makes you feel happy about this work since when you were starting out, and keeping up the conversation very lively and making sure that I would fit it with the exhibition or the theme. And a lot of the artists would really open up. They would say, hey, I wish when I was starting out I would know this, or now that I'm here I now know how to do this work. And I think that some of the artists that I really worked with in the past when I was starting out were inspiring. They motivated me to learn more. They invited me to learn more about their work and also apply some of the lessons that they have shared with me. So one way to overcome the imposter syndrome, and that would be through reaching out to mentors, reach out to other artists, reach out to other online resources that you may find. I will not speak for other artists because other artists, I'm not them. Some artists, like myself, are open to discussing and talking about our journeys, or my journey as an artist. Other people may not. So again, when you talk to people, think about that. Think if they want to share their work with you or their internal thoughts. I want to repeat, make sure you get this checklist, the 12 steps to exhibiting your work in galleries as a beginner artist. It will be helpful to continue to do this work. So point number 8 on how to overcome imposter syndrome is untying my personal self-worth as a person from my work. And I talked a little bit at the beginning of the video, but I think that someone just starting out can really think about, if someone rejects me, if someone doesn't like me, less than, or I'm not a valuable person. And I hate to say that because the more I've grown, the more developed into my career, it's just unbelievable. That kind of mindset did prevent me from applying to things. And essentially, it's a reality of how mindset can play a big role. And it sounds silly not to say it out loud this way, but some of the things that I was going through back then just made me think about how those thoughts were ingrained in me. Again, the biggest thing to overcome the self-imposed imposter syndrome would be to separate my worth as an artist from the work that I was doing. And knowing that my value as a person, my value as an artist, my value as a living being is not tied to my art. If my art is rejected, that does not mean that I'm less than as a person. It's just that it wasn't a good fit, right? And what allowed me to continue to apply to things and being okay, right? Being okay with rejection and untying my self-worth from my work was being compassionate. This meant practicing kindness towards myself, practicing kindness towards me, and knowing that I was growing into a world of art that I was not familiar with. And now, as someone who has participated in a lot of exhibitions and has read other people's accounts, the art world can be very toxic. The art world can be very harmful, and it's not a place that I want to be in, right? The art world can be different to many artists, and in those kinds of spaces, I don't want them in my life. So why am I going to replicate those things in my life when other people are creating those things already for me, right? So why am I going to harm myself when other people are already trying to harm me? So again, practice self-compassion, and that's what I did. Which comes to point number 3 in untying my self-worth from my work, is to celebrate my efforts, recognizing all the courage that it took me to share my work. It takes courage to create, I'm not going to lie. It takes courage to make something so that other people can see. I understand it can be something vulnerable. With critiquing, someone may have opinions about your work, but at the end of the day, they're opinions. It doesn't mean that they're truth. Because someone doesn't like them because of the texture that I use, or a painting was not what I what they like personally. Maybe they prefer more abstract, or maybe they prefer a blue palette over a red palette. That was okay. I think that it takes courage for us to make and put our work where it needs to be and live. And I think that art can do a lot of that. It can show us a lot of confidence. It can show us a lot about knowing the growth that we are able to produce and create. And again, this could be its own different video, and I'll be happy to talk about it, about celebrating our efforts and taking comments or taking feedback from people who are doing more, or people who have more experience doing things than we are doing, versus people who are not doing, people who are just sitting back, people who are just criticizing, people who are just saying, I don't like your work because XYZ. And again, I could talk a lot about that. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to talk about how to accept or reject feedback from other people. So finally, we have 2 more points on overcoming imposter syndrome and how I was able to overcome it when applying to galleries as a beginner artist. So point number 9 is being okay with rejection. And I talked a lot about this point throughout the video. But I think that what has allowed me to do is normalize rejection. And to normalize meaning that it's okay for people to reject my work when submitting to galleries. As I said, rejection is not tied to how valuable you are as an artist or how valuable you are as a person or anything like that. I think that rejection is part of the artistic process. We can talk a lot about where rejection comes from and why people may not make it to art galleries. So again, if you're interested, let me know in the comments down below and we can talk about that. But I think that rejection has been common. All the gallery exhibitions that I have applied or the art opportunities that I have applied in the past, I haven't gotten 100% of them. Some of them have been very aligned with the work that I'm doing and the work that the funder or the gallery is doing. Others have been not as much, but that is okay. Be open to being accepted, but also be open to being rejected is what allowed me to do that. Point number 2 in being okay with rejection is learning from the rejection part itself. Rejection can be feedback. Rejection can tell us a lot about why our work was not accepted. And I think that what allowed me to do this work is I asked people, once they rejected me, to tell me if they could say why I did not make it into the exhibition. And what I found a lot of those times is that it was feedback that I was missing or information that I was missing, or maybe it didn't fit with the selection committee because I didn't know or missed this part of something that I want to talk about. So I was able to use that information to improve my future work and allow me to open up my eyes for other things that I was not paying attention to, or again, I was not aware and I was just learning. The best thing that I could say is to reach out to the galleries and say, hey, I understand my exhibition call or submission was not accepted. Is there a way that you can tell me why this was? And maybe say something like, I will love to use your feedback for future work submissions, if that's okay with you. And you can say something like, I understand that you're busy or you're going through a lot of things right now with the exhibition organization, but let me know if a quick call is something you can provide. Someone who works in grant writing and development and philanthropy, I find that selection committees in these spaces write a lot of feedback in terms of why people do and don't get calls, right? So grants. Ask maybe if the selection committee had anything they can share, any written feedback when they were looking into your application. Right? Again, it's about learning from the rejection and learning to move forward, developing the strength to being okay of not being accepted and just keep going and being persistent. Not letting it hold you back, but rather use that as a lesson. Again, everyone, so we have made it to the end of the video, and I want to encourage you all to continue to think about all the steps that I provided in this series up to this video and more videos that are coming, exploring my art exploring my life as an artist and how we can learn more about exhibiting our work in galleries as beginner artists. And before we leave, I do want to tell you that this checklist is available for you all, and it can bring some and a lot of value on how to essentially create the next steps for you as an artist to exhibit in this process as you're a beginner. Again, what you can expect is 12 points that will guide you and tell you some steps that have worked for me. And the guide is very small, but just because it's small doesn't mean that it's less important. The guide or the checklist is succinct, and it gives you the appropriate or adequate steps for you to feel more comfortable when applying to galleries and hopefully increase your chances of getting there. So again, I encourage you all to download and look at this guide. And also in this video underneath, you can see that I have provided the 12 steps to exhibiting your work in galleries as an artist who is a beginner. And again, don't let this hold you back. Keep going. You got this. Everything will be okay. I want to thank you all for staying to the end of the video. I want to thank you all for your time and also remind you that we are people of value, that artists have so much to give. I encourage you all to be kinder to yourselves, be kinder to other people, and be more compassionate. Let's continue to make the world better through our own actions, as much as we can, of course. And again, thank you all so much. I encourage you to follow me at Antonio Alanis Art on Instagram, or follow me in other social media platforms. You can find more information at antoniolanisart.com. So see you all until next time.